I need you. I know you made a home inside this heart of stone. I need you, so turn it into flesh. Spirits are familiar. I give you all I have. I'm holding nothing back. Jesus, I am yours. Jesus, I am yours. Take over, lover of my soul. Take control. I surrender. There's nothing I want more than to know you, Lord, to know you.
杨林。到7点了。
7点了。
对。你可以在话筒里叫他们一下。用话筒可以叫他们，他们在外面听得见。
叫一下呗。
对。
哦。楚乔说开始了。好，大家都到了哈，我们现在开始今天的聚会，海蓝华人教会青年团契，今天是8月7号，2021年。我们大家先做一个祷告。亲爱的天父，感谢你，赞美你。在这一个周六，大家一起聚到您的殿中，也希望您的圣灵大大的充满我们，也希望你把您的知识和智慧传达给讲员，让讲员给我们分享更好的信息。以上祷告奉主耶稣基督的名求，阿们。好，然后我们看下面是罗马书的5章1到2节，我们既因信称义，就借着我们的主耶稣基督得与神相合，我们又借着他因信得进入现在所占的这恩典中，并且欢欢喜喜盼望神的荣耀。所以说，下面我们来唱这首歌《七恩典》，然后这首歌一共分4段，然后前2段我们用英文唱，后2段我们用中文唱。 是善当世界。善当世界是不但如此，就是在患难中也是欢欢喜喜的，因为知道患难生忍耐，忍耐生老练，老练生盼望，盼望不至于羞耻，因为所赐给我们圣灵将神的爱浇灌在我们的心里。所以说下面这首歌和这个诗比较匹配的叫信靠美句应许。这首歌比较欢快，也希望大家一起唱哈。你是唯一是伤心流泪，转为笑颜。我们生忍耐生老练生盼望，盼望不接受亏欠，没有失望，心中充满盼望，盼望使眼睛明亮。道路水崎岖，你与我同行，心中充满盼望，盼望使信心刚强，信靠每一句应许，生命充满阳光。好，再来一遍。是卑微转为尊高，是伤心流泪转为笑颜。我们生忍耐，忍耐生老练，老练生盼望，盼望不接受亏欠，没有失望，心中充满盼望，盼望使眼睛明亮。道路水崎岖，你与我同行，心中充满盼望，盼望使信心刚强，信靠每一句应许，生命充满阳光。好的，下面是欢迎新朋友的时间。就这么多我都看不到新朋友老朋友来了，都戴着口罩是吧？有没有最近很久没有来的，或者是头一次来教会的朋友想介绍一下，然后让大家认识你一下。
Hi. My name is Sue.
Sue?
Yeah. And this is Chang, my husband. 他是中国人，我是韩国人。Wow. Nice to meet you.
好，欢迎你们。
大家好，我叫刘畅。
刘畅啊。
刘畅，畅通的畅。我是在中国生的，但是在美国长大，所以我中文说的不太很好。但是我是从纽约到达拉斯来了5年来，然后我们刚刚结婚。
欢迎你。
然后这边还有没有呢？
大家好，我叫秀秀，我是韩国人，但是我在上海住了4年。我中文不太好，但是我在学习。我这个是我来的第2次这样。
好，你的中文比我的英文好。好，那还有没有？没有，
大家好，我是盖尔家属。我第一次来这个教会，但是我来美国已经差不多10年。很高兴见到各位。
欢迎你，欢迎你。然后也欢迎你们，我们有微信群，你们有没有进群？然后进我们教会的群，然后能及时收到我们的各种信息哈。然后我们下面家事报告。然后感谢主，中文 VBS 圆满成功，有30个孩子决志，为弟兄姊妹的美好服侍感恩，为以后的 follow up 工作。然后第二个是为秋修会的平安和国校，果校打错了哈。 然后求主暂时使用我们和讲员，带给我们信仰和复兴。然后第3个是为美国的疫情祷告，然后第4个是为教会的弟兄姊妹工作、学习、健康祷告，然后大家都与神更加的亲近。好，那我这个就做到这里了。然后下面我们把讲台交给。
Okay. Hello again. Hello again. So, how many of you guys were not here last time, last week? So, of course, the visitors. It's a few of you now. So we came last time and talked a little bit, and we're not gonna do the same thing. We're gonna do something different this time. But we do have a couple recap slides just to bring everyone up to speed on a few things. So, Janice, I'm Tim Go. This is Janice Go. And good.
I'll try to use this because I think I have a soft voice. So, we are the Go family. Get Will to advance the slide when he gets a chance. So Tim and I are empty nesters. We have 2 kids, Jonathan and Caroline. Jonathan and Christy got married. Our oldest son got married about 1.5 years ago, and they are 26. We also have a younger daughter. Her name is Caroline. And she couldn't make it today, but she'll be up in Dallas this coming week. But she's 24. Jonathan just got his MBA and MD just this last May and in June, and he's working in Houston as with his wife. And then Caroline is actually starting her 3rd year grad student down at Texas Women's University, studying to be a physical therapist. And we have one more child, is Tofu. He is a 9-year-old fur baby, and he is by far the one everybody loves the most. So we moved to Dallas probably about 1 year ago, almost to the date, August of 2020, in the middle of COVID. And we found ourselves here at this church, and so we're so happy to be at this church, and thank you so much for inviting us to speak at your fellowship. Tim and I are basically American Chinese. We grew up I grew up in Galveston. Tim grew up in Houston. And Tim does not speak any Chinese at all. My Chinese is a lot worse than yours. So when you said your Chinese isn't good, I thought, oh my gosh, mine's really, really poor in comparison. But we grew up in Texas. And I would say that the 3 big influencers of our growing up years is our Chinese heritage, our Christian faith, and our parents' upbringing. And so we kind of brought this into play last week when we were talking about how to be a Christian in the workplace, how to act like a Christian. And I think if we wanted to summarize what our parents taught us growing up, it was 3 main things, which was to fear God, love your family, and to work hard. And I think that's a very common thread among the Asians in the way that their families are raised and the values that they hope to instill in their children and their children's children. And so with our families, we are actually 3rd generation. We have 3 generations in the United States. Our parents were 1st generation immigrants. We are 2nd generation, and our children are 3rd generation. And we are also 3 generations of Christians. So, this is still a summary. Our careers are that I am a physical therapist. I retired to be a homemaker. And so that is actually my current profession. Tim started out as a chemical engineer. He is still a chemical engineer, but he's actually more of an executive right now at Holly Frontier, which is an oil and gas company. And that is what brought us here to Dallas. Next slide. And so let's just, in summary, oops, sorry, go back again, Will. I'm so sorry. In summary, last week we talked about, we tried to break it up into 3 main chunks on, if we were to summarize how to be a Christian in your career based on our own personal experiences. I think I tried to speak a little bit about you can be a Christian in your career by your witness. And the question was, how can you be a witness? A witness is someone who speaks the truth and lives the truth, right? And so you can speak the truth. You can be ready to give an answer to why your faith, what your faith is, and what you believe in. And then you live the truth by trying to be a signpost, so that the things you do, the things that you say, point to Jesus Christ. The second way to be a Christian in your career, in summary, is through your work ethic. And we said there's a Christian work ethic that you should try to view work as. That is basically that your work is for God. Excellently, to work as hard as you can for God and enjoy the benefits of that. And so it's a perspective that you take toward work in order to show that you're a little bit different, because Christ calls us to work for Him with all our strength and enjoy blessings thereafter. And then the last thing that we talked about was how to be a Christian in your career through your weakness, which is trusting God when your plans do not go the way you want them to. When there are hiccups along the way, when along your career path, circumstances happen and it's not what you wanted or what you could have anticipated, that is trusting God in your weakness. Because the things you can't control, God can control.
Okay, so the last recap slide, and we're going to move into the new stuff. But if you remember, we had a slide on food for thought, and we were talking about how painful it is to go to work sometimes, and you know how we just view it as toil and heartache and trouble. Other than Pastor and Esther, you know, everyone kind of hates their job, right? And we went back in Genesis and again just realized that working, toiling, why does God want us to toil? It's the curse of Adam and Eve, right? When they took the bite of the apple from the tree of knowledge, the fruit of the tree of knowledge, they then were cursed to painful toil, and then all the days of their lives they would have to toil, work, strain, just to make a living, just to provide for themselves, because they were separated from God. And that really, when we struggle at work, when we struggle in our job, it's a reminder of the separation that we have from God. But that's not what God wants. God wants us to commit our work to the Lord. He wants us to establish our ways with Him. He wants us to be reconciled to Him. And there is nothing better, as Solomon said, for a person that he should eat, drink, and find enjoyment in his toil. God provides reconciliation, right, by sending His Son, Jesus Christ, to die for our sins, to reunite us back into His presence, so that we no longer have to live under the curse of toil that we had when we were sinners, right? And so it's not about the slavery that we have as a cursed position from God, but it's about our salvation, because we have been reunited with God and we are reconciled and no longer have to live a cursed life under work. And so that, you know, we kind of wrapped it up that way, and then we took questions and we just kind of talked about some practical applications. So if you go to the next slide, Will, this is the second part. And when Will originally asked us to come speak to this group, he asked us to do it in two parts. The first one was, Christ in our career, and that's what we tried to cover last week. And then Will asked if we could talk about being Chinese American or being Asian in our career, and how does that impact, our careers and our work. And so that's what we wanted to focus on today. Okay. And what we'll do is the same thing. We'll go through some foundational study, and then we'll do some practical application type of discussions, and then we'll be happy to do questions and answers at the end. Okay.
So we thought that first to understand being Asian American in the U.S. is to understand the history of Asian Americans in the U.S. And I don't know how many of you guys know, because some of you have been in the U.S. for only 4 years. Because I think that's a good place to start. You'll understand why Asians are viewed and treated a certain way if you understand a little bit about the history. And so we're going to do a real quick history tour of that. So I like to break up Asian Americans. I talked to my parents, and so on and so forth. I kind of did a survey to see if I was accurate. But there's really, if you could break it up, there's been probably about 3 major waves of Asian Americans coming and immigrating to the U.S. The first wave is the Asian immigrants that came in the mid-1800s. They were mostly Chinese, and they worked as coal miners and laborers. More than 10,000 men built the transcontinental railroad that came from the east all the way to California. They were called coolies. I don't know if you've ever heard of that term. Coolie is basically an indentured servant, and it's actually a derogatory term. It's kind of like calling a Hispanic a wetback. It was not a nice term, but they were called coolies. These immigrants that first came, they faced very hostile, very violent treatment from the locals. There's a history of unprosecuted murder and violence, and so as a consequence, many gathered together and then formed their own communities, and they created Chinatowns. And of course, the 2 oldest ones are in New York, and then the one out in California in San Francisco. And these first wave of Asians were perceived as being invaders, that they were threatening someone's life, that the Asians were overwhelming them. And so it was a very, very negative impression of the Asians that came. And so since that first group that came in to build the coolies, that came in to build the railroads, there's been this legacy of exclusion and inequality in the United States government, specifically against Asians. And the worst offenses were actually against the Chinese and the Japanese immigrants. Asian immigrants were barred from gaining citizenship in the United States for most of U.S. history between 1790 and 1952. And that includes Japanese, Korean, Vietnamese, from India as well. And so there's a couple of very interesting acts. This first one was called the Page Act of 1875. It prohibited the recruitment of any laborers from China or Japan or any Oriental country coming to the U.S. and explicitly barred Asian women from being brought to the U.S. So when that happened, that stifled the ability of Chinese men to start families because they barred Asian female immigration. You didn't know that. The other act was the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882. This is the only U.S. law that's ever been passed by Congress that prevented immigration and naturalization of people based on their race. And it actually bans Chinese workers from entering the United States and blocking Chinese immigration to the U.S. And it was against the Chinese. It was not against any other ethnic race in the United States. This is the only law that's ever passed. And then the Immigration Act of 1917 set an Asiatic barred zone that again said everyone in this Asian area cannot immigrate. And you know about the Japanese internment camps of World War II. More than 120,000 Japanese Americans working and living in the West Coast were forced into internment camps. Approximately 2/3 of these, 70,000 of these, targeted were U.S.-born citizens. And they were taken to the camps, no charges, nothing was ever done against German Americans or anybody else that was actually fighting against the United States during World War II. And so this first wave of immigration, there was a lot of clear discrimination and dislike of the Asian folks. Second wave, I'd like to say, started in 1965. And that was mostly Chinese from Taiwan, from the Philippines, Asians from Japan, Korea, India, Hong Kong. You know, the civil rights movement of 1965, Martin Luther King, helped to pass this National Immigration and Nationality Act. I think I've got that up there. It's also called the Hart-Celler Act. And it put an end to immigration policies based on ethnicity and race and on the quota system. There used to be a quota and Asians weren't allowed to come in. So they expanded that quota to 20,000 Asians per Asian country. So 20,000 from Japan, 20,000 from Korea, from Taiwan, from Philippines, whatever. They finally opened up the doors and allowed people to come in. Our parents, Tim's parents, my parents, came to the United States when this opened up. They were part of that 20,000 that came. And the interesting thing is the U.S. opened the doors for college degree and professional graduates. They only wanted the best and brightest. So those that came to the United States were very, very educated. They were very smart. They came for a better life to the United States. They did not come to be coolies, and they were invited. The third wave, I would say, is mostly mainland Chinese, and then later refugees. And most of that started happening in the 1980s. They opened the Visiting Fellows program. China began to open their doors. And then definitely after Tiananmen, the U.S. welcomed as many educated, graduate, college-level Chinese from mainland China to stay in the U.S. And so that's kind of, I think, the three major waves of Asian Americans in America. And, you know, the second wave created this model minority stereotype that exists today. You know, they are the ones that came, they're the model minority because they're educated, they speak well, they contribute a huge amount to the U.S. economy, to the U.S. culture. And this is the perception of Asian Americans that actually continues today. So, Tim and I grew up, as we were thinking about this, we were the very first generation of second generation immigrant American Chinese. We grew up post-lifting of the 1965 ban on Asian immigration. And so I will say that, yes, I grew up and Tim grew up being harassed and bullied for being Chinese American by our classmates. I remember when I was in 5th grade, and it, you know, we always heard, you know, Chink, go home. I don't know what home I would go to. This is my home. And derogatory things and a lot of obnoxious kinds of rhymes. But I had this one guy, he was twice my size. He was bullying me all year long. His name was Troy Ostermeyer. And every morning he'd come and make fun of me because I was Chinese. Very, very obnoxious and typical. You just kind of ignore him because he's just stupid. Well, we had a, I guess, a parent event, and my parents came one time and met I don't know if it was a performance, I can't remember, but the next day, Troy came up to me and he made fun of my dad. And, you know, I think for me, it was a big deal if he was bothering me, but he kind of crossed the line when he made fun of my dad's accent. And my dad's a professor who teaches medical school at UTMB. He's not an idiot, but he does have an Asian accent. And then he went on and on about my dad, why can't he talk right? And, why don't Chinese people able to do anything? And I don't know what happened, but I think I must have just gone into a different realm, because I remember my fist balled up, and I was so mad. I was so mad at him that, and he's probably this tall, because I'm this little Chinese girl. I actually whacked him and slugged him. And I hit him right here, because that was about all I could reach. And I don't know who was more surprised, him or myself. But I hit him really hard, because I think his hip was back. And then I ran, because I'm not a fool. This guy is like twice my size. He can beat me up. And I ran back to the teacher, and I sort of hung out with her all day, because I knew that when I came and had to leave the classroom, my life was in peril, because I just bought this guy, and he probably didn't like it. And he was waiting for me when we left, but I left for the teacher, so he couldn't do anything. And the next day, he left me alone, and he left me alone for the rest of the year. I'm not saying that is what you need to do, but it's the kind of, and I've never hit another man in my life before, but it was the stupidity of harassment that, finally broke the camel's back. And this was the type of stuff that I think I grew up with, and Tim grew up with, all the way from, fifth graders. And they learned that from their parents, I mean, I don't know, you would think that fifth graders don't do that, they're children, but it was real, and it was constant.
It's funny, because we're going through another wave of discrimination, right? As a lot of the kids in the school right now are being bullied and discriminated against for being Asian. It's just a reminder, Janice and I, it's kind of going back around again, because this is how it all started. In some respects, when we came and went through school, and I think I said this last time, I was the only Asian kid in my school. Right? There was no other Asians.
I was one of three.
And in many respects, we were kind of forging new territory as we were going through this. People didn't know how to respond or react around us, and we didn't really know how to respond or react around them. And there's those rhymes that so Chinese, Japanese, preacher, teacher. There's another one that's dirty knees. We just grew up with thick skin, right? We just had to turn the other cheek and just kind of endure, right? That's kind of how it's been. When we went to Chinese church, we both grew up in a Chinese church. And again, it felt like we were the first generation to go through it. We were the first kids to go through, living in America with Asian parents, right? Who would come from overseas. And so everything was new. Everything was kind of new. And one of the examples we talked about a little bit last time, but probably not a lot, was we both went to the University of Texas at Austin, for those of you who weren't here last time. And we met at a Chinese Bible study on campus. It was about 10 people strong at that point. My brother was one of the 10.
And it was ABC, American Born Chinese.
They were all American Born Chinese. We were, again, trying to forge new territory, 50,000 people on campus, and a Chinese Bible study of 10, right? And we really loved getting together Friday evenings, I guess, and just started doing that routinely. Pretty soon the 10, I guess when we came in, we went to 20, and so we started having a larger group. The next year they went to 50. Next year we went to 100. And then the final year that we were there, we were 150 people, and the largest Christian organization on campus. And it was just kind of a God thing. It was neat to be part of it, but we were trying things and just learning things, on our own. It was just, we always felt like we were kind of the first ones out, and just had to learn new things. And so even to this day, Janice and I feel like we're still kind of experimenting. We're still out there because now we have kids that are going through all this, same thing, and they're going through experiences now that no one else has come to yet, right? So it's kind of that whole experience of being on the forefront of what this country is trying to go through in terms of melting pot and diversity. One of the things that I will tell you also is, after we came back from college, this may be more for the family fellowship, but after we came back from college, we went back to the same Chinese churches that we grew up in Houston. We left Austin, went back to Houston. Houston Chinese Church, for those of you guys who are in Houston, may know that. We went back to Houston Chinese Church, and I can tell you, we struggled. We struggled going back to Houston Chinese Church. And I think for the family fellowship group, a lot of their kids who are in high school and who are, part of this church, they're going to go through the same thing. When their kids go to college, they're going to see a different world. They're going to be part of probably non-Chinese Asian churches, and it's going to be hard for them to come back when they come back from college, because that's just part of the growing experience. You start to become more Americanized as opposed to wanting to worship together as an ethnic Asian group. And we went through that whole thing, and those are kind of experiences that I think a lot of the family fellowship group is going to have to start going through as well. And we feel for them. We know what that's like, but it's a necessary evil in terms of having to go through.
Yeah, and our parents, it's interesting. You can look at the evolution of the churches, the Asian churches, Korean, Chinese, Vietnamese. That generation, I know of only Houston Chinese Church. Church was more than a place to worship. It was a place for you to fellowship and gather and spend time with people of your own kind in a safe place. And that's why the churches had these lunches right after service. And then after that, it was all the children got rounded up and had to go to Chinese school for an hour and a half. I think we did that for 4 years. And it was basically the whole youth group got thrown into Chinese school. And so church was actually a whole day affair. My parents felt that it was so important for me, because I lived down in Galveston. Galveston is an entire hour away from Houston. It's south, and it's an island south of Houston. They actually drove us to Houston Chinese Church, hour and a half, every Sunday, just so that we could be part of the youth group and so they could fellowship with people who looked like them and they had the same experience that they did. And that is similar with Tim. He actually went to Chinese Baptist Church across town. All these churches were doing exactly the same thing, trying to bond as an Asian community and trying to figure out our place in the U.S. The interesting thing is the assumption among most white Americans is that Asians were not a minority. They're actually an honorary white person. And so most Asians, like Tim and myself, you didn't hang out with the Hispanic people or the African American, you hung out with white people. And so you were considered an honorary white, probably because you're always in the advanced placement classes, you were always doing more academic type stuff. The irony of that, though, is when you start to apply for college, you realize that you're actually not white. You might be honorary white, but you were clearly labeled a minority and an Asian minority at that. So that's the dichotomy that I think probably exists today. And so you'll find that you guys are probably finding that is maybe an experience even as professionals. You know, the Asians are just kind of this model minority, not one that you need to spend a lot of time managing. But they're still a minority. And I think that despite, if you look at the history of Asian immigration in the United States, there has been a lot of discrimination. And there hasn't been a lot of repair legislatively or in any form of that discrimination. And yet, Asians as a whole have flourished without any handouts, without any help from the government or anyone else in the United States. And we think that as we look at it and we look at our own experience talking to our coworkers and people, that it is the Asian work ethic and the Asian culture that have enabled us as Asians to prosper and thrive in the United States, despite all of the obstacles that are in our way. And we're going to talk about that right now. So there's 20 million Asian Americans, and if you look at, you Google it, there's all these statistics, all these articles from all these professors and Harvard and Columbia and whatnot, but basically Asians are the most successful minority in America. The type of the model minority. They have, success-wise, we have the highest educational attainment, and this stats are somewhere, if you know, but they have the highest median income. Asians have the lowest unemployment. Asians make up 12% of the professional workforce in the United States. Asian Americans make up only 6.3% of the US population, but they account for about a quarter of all students in the Ivy League institutions. These, we would say, are successes, especially seeing how in the 1800s, there were all sorts of obstacles that Asians had to overcome on their own in order to live and thrive in the United States. However, I would say that there are also a whole bunch of failures. Given all of these great successes, why do Asian Americans make up only 1% of corporate leadership in the Fortune 500 companies? So for example, in 2017, there were only 16 Asian CEOs versus 440 white CEOs in the Fortune 500 companies. These are 500 biggest companies in the United States, right? And of these 16, 13 are what they call South Asian, which is basically Indian America, from India. And only 3 were from East Asia, meaning China, Japan, Korea, basically not from India. So you look at that, and that doesn't seem quite right. And there's also in academia, paucity of representation in prestigious academic faculty appointments. Asians comprise 10% of full-time faculty appointments, but nationally they hold less than 2.9% of the endowed scholarships, professorships, and less than 1.7% of the distinguished professorships. These are the most coveted, the highest professorships. There aren't any very many East Asians in there. Statistically speaking, that doesn't make sense either. And then some observations I just want to point out, because this will lead to our discussion, is that, the same stereotypes that help Asians succeed in the educational domain, meaning we're smart, we're competent, we're hardworking, they may actually hurt Asians in the labor market, where Asian Americans are sometimes perceived to be less vocal, less assertive, lacking in social skills and leadership potential. And this Professor Jennifer Lim wrote this article. She's, I think, a Harvard professor. The other thing is racial stereotypes pigeonhole Asians in positions that often require technical expertise. And because they are seen as differential worker bees. Asian Americans are rarely given the opportunity to work on assignments that can develop their strategic and leadership skills. Also, Asian American professionals are often excluded from the informal power networks in the workplace, which sometimes matter more than competency when it comes to being promoted into leadership ranks. Another potential reason for the lack of executive representation is that second generation Asian professionals often lack Asian role models and effective mentors in the workplace. Just because there's 2017, there are only 3 Asian CEOs in all the Fortune 500 companies. And despite their educational credentials, this other study found clear evidence that Asian professionals are over-credentialized in education to achieve parity with whites in the labor market. This is a Columbia professor who's doing this study. So it's basically saying for the same position that a white counterpart may have a bachelor's degree, the Asian counterpart probably has a master's degree or a PhD. So that being said, why is there a lack of Asian representation in executive roles and prestigious faculty appointments? We think that and from what we've experienced and read, that is a combination of 3 things: individual, cultural, and organizational factors. These impede career progression of Asian Americans. So what does that mean? Let's look at the individual differences. These are like personality, the way you were basically, if you could stereotype Asians, these are the individual differences. In general, Asians work hard. They have good grades. You can see that in school. That's why there's so many represented in the Ivy League. They've got good scientific and technical expertise. Asians are self-reliant. Asians have a quiet respect for authority. They have built a premium on building relationships. And they tend to self-sacrifice. Asians are also quiet, studious, intelligent, and disciplined. This is Tim's slide. That's not laughing at. He was looking at me like, hey, my name is on that slide.
No, that's okay. And so these are stereotypes that we all resemble, quite honestly, right? On the other hand, if on the Caucasian side, the white side, their strengths or their stereotypes are their good social awareness, they have soft skills, listeners, and communicators, they directly engage you, they do things that are more relational, right? They do team activities and work activities together more than, say, the individuals, the Asians. They're more assertive, they take initiative, they're certainly more outspoken. As Asians have that stereotype of being more persistent, more hardworking and consistent. The Caucasians are, they're what we say one-time transactions. They a burst of energy, they do something, but then they fall back. They're not as hardworking and consistent as the Asians. And instead of self-sacrifice, they're much more self-advocacy, right? They're always talking about themselves, they're always trying to promote themselves, right? So that's the different types of stereotypes that people might see. It's not true for everyone, but that clearly is driving some of the separation or some of the differences.
So now let's look at cultural differences. I thought this was a good way to summarize cultural differences. So, Asians, especially Chinese Americans, Confucius is a guiding, Confucius sayings are a guiding principle in how Chinese live their lives. So Confucius says, the nail that sticks out gets hammered. And Americans say, The squeaky wheel gets what? The oil. And that, I think, is a very good summary of cultural differences. On the one hand, Confucius says, do not stick out. You're gonna get your head hammered, right? Don't stick out. On the other hand, Americans say, squeaky wheel, it gets the oil. Make yourself known. And so Confucian and Asian culture, they value humility, they value conformity, they value consensus. That's why at the dinner table, there's usually not a lot of arguing with your elders, right? They value interpersonal harmony at all costs. Do not rock the boat, deferring to authority. Americans, they value assertiveness, they actually like competition, resiliency, and self-advocacy. And, you know, when China, I guess it's Ming Dynasty, could have probably easily dominated the world because they invented gunpowder and complexes and paper and all of this. They chose to build a wall to keep the barbarians out of their country. That is Asian culture, right? They probably could have conquered the medieval knights that didn't even have anything but swords, but they chose to build a wall because they did not want to mess with anybody messing with them. And, you know, when we went to school, there's this concept of manifest destiny. The idea that the U.S. is destined by God to expand its dominion, spread democracy, capitalism, and actually Christianity, the faith, across the entire North American continent. That's what caused this westward expansion into California. You expand and you share what is important that you think is important to society. And so culturally, clearly there's a big difference. And lastly, I think there's the organizational factors. We already went through this discrimination legacy. You know, it started in the 1800s. That legacy persists. It was never addressed, and it was actually never fixed. It just sort of just lingers on. Stereotypes continue to endure today. Some of it is self-perpetuated. We'll talk about that. But some of it is just systemic. We went from, you know, coolies to the modern, to the model minority. Those are continue to be perpetuated. And I think people and institutions gravitate toward their own comfort zone. And you'll find this a lot in industry, which is a white male-dominated zone. And there are hidden curriculums in earning academia's prestigious titles. There is difficult entry into this good old boy system that you've heard in business industry. It exists. We all know about it. We just don't talk about it, right? And so these are the organizational factors that contribute to Asian in business. So that's the bad news, sort of. But I think there's a lot as Christians, and again, this is always asking, because we're a Bible study here, the Christian perspective on all of that. And I thought about this, Tim and I thought about this for a while. You know, I think we should think about this concept of hope versus hate. You know, Christ told us that these things I have spoken to you, that in me you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble, but take heart because I've overcome the world. You know, every minority has its ceilings. We can complain as Asians that we have a bamboo ceiling. Women have a glass ceiling. African Americans have a ceiling. Hispanic Americans have a ceiling. It doesn't matter the color of your skin. If you're a minority group, there's usually a ceiling. It's not something that's specific against Asians. And history will always tell us, as you have seen, that power corrupts. Those in general that have power, there but for the grace of God, will be corrupted by power. How many history stories have we heard? Genghis Khan trying to conquer the world, the Romans, they enslaved everybody, Napoleon, Hitler. People do evil things to each other. And for the world to change, countries have to change. And for countries to change, societies have to change. Societies to change, people have to change. For people to change, hearts have to change. At the end of the day, the only person who can change your heart is Jesus Christ. And that is the truth, because people in power will do evil things to each other. And that is the tragic part of it. And so as Christians, Christ tells us to have hope and not to hate what is not just and what is unfair. He knows this, he tells us this so that we can have peace. We will have trouble, but take heart. Jesus Christ has overcome the world. And so the only equality, where we're going to really, the only true equality is actually in Jesus Christ. And the Bible clearly tells us that before God, we are all equal in his mercy and his grace, and we're all sinners too. Is God the God of Jews only? Is he not the God of Gentiles too? Yes, of Gentiles too. Romans 3:29. Then Peter began to speak. I now truly understand that God does not show favoritism. Acts 10:34. Including us, who he called not only from the Jews, but also from the Gentiles. For there's no difference between Jew and Greek. The same Lord is Lord of all, and gives richly to all who call on him. Romans 10:12. So that the Gentiles may glorify God for his mercy, as it's written, therefore I will praise you among the Gentiles, I will sing hymns in your name. There is neither Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, male or female, for you're all one in Jesus Christ. And thanks be to God that before Christ, we are all equal.
And so we want to transition into more, again, practical kind of stuff now. But again, the whole inequality, discrimination, struggles, Jews versus Gentiles, the slave versus free, that all continues to be the results of our sin nature, right, as humans. And that's what, again, that's, if we continue to live in that world, continue to live in our sin, slavery to that sin, God calls us to if there was anyone who was discriminated against, if anyone who was misunderstood, if anyone who was treated poorly, it was Jesus Christ. And yet he set the example for how to overcome that. That's the guys that don't get discouraged, don't get down. So if you go to the next slide, what we thought we'd do is now just kind of switch gears. Okay, so again, that's foundational, but how does this actually play out? And so one of the things that I just wanted to summarize was, so stereotypes of Asian singles, right? This is what I see. This is what people as I here. But this is a summary of what we just covered. But Asians are often viewed as deferential. We defer. We defer to others' opinions. We'll defer to other people who have a strong feeling about something. We'll defer, whereas some of our colleagues will be much more assertive. They'll be much more valuable. Much more aggressive. Right? That's a typical stereotype. Asians are typically technical in nature, but I can't imagine going up to someone who has dinner. People will always ask me. First thing they'll ask me is, second thing they'll ask me is, am I an engineer? Right? I mean, it's a typical view of technical. No one ever asks about the COO. Right? we're very task oriented. And this goes to, just think about your child. We're very task oriented. We gotta play the piano. We gotta, play the violin, right? We gotta achieve, we gotta get that A, that very much. We got to, everything we do is achievement oriented, task oriented. Whereas a lot of the Caucasian homes, it's very relational based. At dinner when they're talking about what did you do today? What did you learn? Who did you talk to? What did you talk about? Whereas,
what was the best part of your day?
My dinner table was, did you have to go over tests, right? What did you get on your homework, right? And it was very achievement sensory, right? And even to this day, how we react to our kids, I can still see very much that same type of thing. Whereas we'll go to work, and again, my executive team, we'll have, one good thing with COVID is we've been having lunch together every day. And it's interesting because I'm so badly just want to start talking about work. We had the people there were saying there's things we want to talk about. I want to get going, right? I want to work through lunch. I want to keep going. Whereas my colleagues will, never talk about everything else about work. Just to try to get, they're wanting to know that you as a person. Asians are generally risk averse, right? We'll generally want to be conservative. We'll generally take the safety path. Whereas many of the Americans are not taking chances. What do they have to lose? They're gonna swing to the fences, right? And so that also is a stereotype. It's not always true, but it's a stereotype. And then the last thing I would just say, again, this is what I see it work. Asians are typically viewed as poor, right? Very technical. They do all math and do all the calculations. But leave it to the Americans to do the speeches, to do the persuasion, motivation, right? That's very much those. Sorry, I got it.
We thought he was technical. He didn't turn out.
So that's good, much better. So that's another stereotype: communication versus persuading and being persuasive. Does that sound about right to you? Does that sound familiar? Okay.
So, that being said, you should work smarter, not necessarily harder. You should recognize why we are different and adapt to be more American in your characteristics if you desire a higher career advancement. So like my dad, he's quite happy being a professor. He's retired now, but he loved just, in his lab doing his own thing. His aspirations were not to be the decorated department chair, right? So a lot of it has to do with what you think God is calling you to do. If you aspire to be higher, have a more managerial or leadership type of a profession, recognize what are typical American cultural prototypes of leaders and executives. And you can just Google this too. We see this a lot with some of the people that, like Tim was saying, we have to have dinner with them and we got to interact with them. Very typical of most executives and managers, department heads, so on and so forth, is they have this ability to learn from the past. If something goes wrong, you file it away, you learn from it. They have strong communication skills. They like to build relationships. they have what they call a realistic optimism, meaning they have, what was that thing that Fred said? They've got this ability to lead because they're energetic. They're not reserved. They can, like Donald Trump is an extreme example. It gets you to follow him because he's so optimistic. You want to follow him because he is so bullish on everything, right? There's a dynamic component of his personality. And that, again, is they're not, he just lets it all out a little bit too much sometimes. He lets it out. They're understanding, there's good listening skills, the willingness to take calculated risks. And part of this has to do with actually taking initiative. That is a calculated risk. And reading people, adapting to necessary management styles, actually wanting to coach people, coaching employees, and then thinking outside of the box. So our observation is that the biggest thing that Asians seem to need a little help in is soft skills and personal presentation. You've probably heard this many times. First impressions matter. Experts say we size up a new person somewhere between 30 seconds to 2 minutes once you meet them. You don't have a whole lot of time to make a good first impression. You should go out of your way to make an outstanding first impression, especially at job interviews. So a couple of things that I noticed when I was reading, we live in the Highland Park area and get these magazines, University Park, Highland Park magazines, and most of it is just advertising. But there was, and I didn't bring it today, but there was an article there, and it was a mom, and she wrote to Miss Manners, and she said, I am so concerned about my middle school age kids. COVID has forced them to stay home so that their social skills are getting very bad. How do I help them to continue to develop their social skills? I don't think they talk to adults very well. They're not comfortable just speaking on what they call small talk. And it occurred to me, and her response was, well, you can practice small talk. Make them go to, when you're shopping, to the clerk and say, can you help me find a green shirt? Ask them to speak to another adult at a restaurant. Have them order their own food. Make sure they have eye contact. Make sure that, and if the Caucasian families are already training their children when they are 11 years old on what is appropriate small talk, how to converse with adults, how to be comfortable in your own skin, how to ask normal questions. That's no wonder they're so much better at this than we are, because that's not something Asian families consider part of their childhood responsibility. So social etiquette, learn table etiquette, know where the knife goes, know which side is your fork, which side is your glass, which side is your bread side, things like that, so that if you have to go out to dinner, you are prepared. This is the typical, if you aspire for a higher position, you need to have the skills commensurate for that position. Social conversation can be small talk. Small talk is what Tim was saying. Be comfortable coming up to someone and saying, how are you doing? What did you do this summer? I noticed you're wearing that dress. It's great. Where did you get that from? What did y'all do for a vacation? Just small talk, trying to get to know someone. And you can practice that, and you can get better at that. And it may not be very comfortable to start with, but practice makes perfect. The other thing we notice is that Asians do handicap themselves if they don't take dress for success seriously. If you're going to an interview, dress for success. We are, and Tim and I are very frugal, we are very frugal when it comes to buying clothes. And generally Asians are very conservative in the style of clothing that they buy. And oftentimes they are not very current, or what they wear is no style at all. So, when Tim was interviewing to be the CEO of Calumet, I told him, and it's not like he didn't already have a lot of suits. I said, you need to go get a new suit. And he's like, I don't need a new suit. I'm like, you need a new suit. I'm looking through GG magazine, I'm watching the guys on television, the news broadcaster, I'm going, what color is the power top? What color is going on? Men have very limited fashions, but it's like, what does the lapel look like? What kind of shirts are everybody wearing? What kind of ties? And so I went through the whole thing, and I had figured out what color. We went to an actual what was it? It was a soutier store that they just did suits. And for the first time in his life, he paid full price for a suit. And it was custom tailored to him. She said, everyone that I fit, this is the owner, every time I fit for a suit has gotten their job. And we picked the power tie, we picked the designer suit, designer shoes, did the whole thing, and he got the job. Of course, it's not just the clothing, but you understand what I'm saying. If you expect to be a department head, you need to dress according to that position. And you don't have to spend a lot of money on clothes. There are sales going on all the time. But it is worth an investment, because you look at your colleagues and they're dressed well. And it's because they realize that dressing for success does make a difference. The other thing that we used to do when we didn't have a whole lot of money is, you just you buy something that doesn't quite fit. That's fine if you're a contact engineer, but when you continue to go up in the ranks of management, you need to go to a tailor and probably cuff your pants so they're the right length, cuff your sleeves so they're the right length. It doesn't have to be a designer outfit. It just needs to fit well. Get a good haircut. If you wear glasses, consider something that's current. That, make an investment in your glasses so that it's a design that is current. Those are the little things that you can do because it's so competitive, that will help you to have a little bit more equal playing field.
Okay, well, yeah, tips for a successful career. So this is kind of like a page we had last time too, but just a couple things to summarize. So, you've heard that saying, when in Rome, act like a Roman, right? When in America, act like an American, right? And so one of the tips is, we can hold on to, I'm not saying don't hold on to your heritage and your Asian culture, right? I'm not saying that. But if you want to fit in, you've got to try to fit in, right? You've got to make an effort to be part of America, as opposed to, a lot of times I'll see at work, some Asians, they'll sit together at lunch, or they'll sit together, at break time. And, they're just off into their own, they're talking Chinese or Vietnamese or Korean, and they just exclude themselves from everyone else, right? And it's just, they're not trying to be Roman, right? And that's if you want to be successful, if you want to, fit in, if you want to be part of that crowd, you're going to have to make an effort to be a part of that crowd. And what Janice was talking about, dressing, that's a big part of it. Small talk, being able to talk about things that are happening in the world, especially in America, is important. You got to be able to, you got to be able to watch football, right? I mean, I'll tell you, you're not going to survive in your business world if you can't talk a little bit about football. I'll just give you that warning. But it's just trying to be a little bit more like a Roman when you're in Rome. My parents had a different philosophy when I was growing up. It was interesting. And and thankful, and then regretful in other areas. But Janice said, I don't speak any Chinese. When my parents speak fluent Chinese to each other. My older sister knows a little bit of Chinese. They still talk to her a little bit in Chinese. When my older brother came around, they tried, but it was too distracting. So by the time I came around, they gave up. Right? There was no Chinese discussions at all. To me, it was all just you're in America. Both my parents worked, so I was a latchkey kid. They sent me to school. They sent me to daycare, and I was on my own. And their philosophy was, we want you to be successful in America, so we want you to be an American, right? And so I never went to Chinese school. I'm very thankful for that, to the sense that I am where I am today because I was kind of thrown in and immersed into that American culture from the beginning. I will tell you today, as we look back on it, I regret not being able to talk Chinese, right? Not being able to have someone behind me. So I want to learn. I'm trying to figure out how to catch up on some of that. But I can tell you that I would not be where I am today if my parents, didn't throw me in and made me just go full immersion into the American culture. The second tip we have here is accept your strengths and accept your weaknesses. And the reason I put this here is a lot of times, Janice went through the stats about how we have Asians are highly representative in Ivy League schools. They're highly representative in technical functions, but very scarcely represented in management or in other kind of areas like that. And in some respects, there's things we can do about it, like we're talking about communication skills, soft skills, things like that. But the reason I put know your strengths and your weaknesses is because, quite honestly, a lot of people gravitate towards the technical side of things because they like it and because that's what they feel comfortable with and that's what they enjoy. And so don't try to be someone you're not, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Know what your strengths, know what your weaknesses are. I'm a very technical person and I got my reputation at Exxon when I first started off with Exxon as being a very smart, very technical person. But in my case, I really knew I wanted to be more on the management side, and that's where I had grown up in. That's what I had done. I mean, in terms of practice, and in terms of when I say full immersion, when I was in high school, just again the family fellowship group might relate to some of this more with their kids. But when I went to high school, I was in Houston, class of 550 kids or so. I was the valedictorian. I was the class president, right? And I lettered in, multiple sports, right? I mean, so that's the kind of immersion that I had been thrown into. And so I knew at that time that I wanted, and I had the skills and I had the ability to continue to climb on that management side. And I didn't want to stay on the technical side. I wanted to be on the management side. But I would tell you, not everyone is like that. My brother, for example, same family, right? My brother grew up with the same parents in the same way. He was not. He was not that. He loves the technical side of things. He does not want to be on the management side of things. He started at Exxon as well. He's 2 years older than me, and he's still at Exxon. But he is, climbed the technical ladder, and he is, one of the highest level technical people at Exxon. Never had a desire to cross over and be on the management side. So I think it's just important. Know what you want to be. Don't want to do something just because other people are doing it. want to do it because it's what you want. It's your strength. It's your passion. It's your you know, it's where your energy is. You know, I was talking to my CEO here this week, and we were talking about introverts and extroverts. And most Asians are introverts, although, you know, there are extroverts. I know several extroverts from school that are Asian. But you can tell if you're an introvert or an extrovert by what I would say, whether it drains energy or whether it builds energy doing things. So, for example, we were talking about, you know, the small talk, this socialism, this socialization, this ability to respond. We've been on the road. We announced a big merger this week. And if you guys saw that, but $2 billion merger. We just bought out a smaller company, and we went on the road this week to their employees to kind of welcome them and kind of get off on the right foot. It was exhausting, right? I mean, so you're on the road. We went to 3 different sites, and in 2 days, and we were just, you know, answering questions, trying to help them understand, you know, how happy we were that we were joining forces and welcoming them to our family. And at the end of the day, we both, my CEO and me as the COO, at the end of the day, we would just be exhausted, and we would just say that was a lot of work. And what we realized was we were both introverts, because that kind of work, while we could do it, that kind of work drained us of energy. Whereas we know a lot of people at our company that just love that kind of stuff, right? And they actually feed off of that. They actually get more energy by being an extrovert, right? And it's just the way that your nature is set up, right? So I say that by, if you know where your strengths and your weaknesses are, and you know what drains your energy, and you know what gives you energy, that's really what will help you understand where you want to focus and where you want to concentrate, what you want to do. Don't try to be something that's going to drain you of energy, because you're just going to be miserable your whole career. Make friends at work. That's we talked a little bit about that before. As Asians, and my parents are perfect examples of this. They didn't have any friends at work, right? I mean,
My parents didn't either.
You know, they go to work, they do their job, they come home, right? That's what they viewed as their job, and they did it well, and then they came home, right? If you want to be successful at work, you're going to have to develop relationships and friendships at work, and so that means investment, that means time, that means extra effort. That means you may have to go out to lunch. We talked about that a little bit last time, with some of your colleagues. It means you may have to go, to dinner, or you may have to invite them over, or they may have to invite you over. Next time someone invites you over, don't just say no, right? I mean, how many times do the Asians say, no, we don't want to bother you, we won't be in any trouble, we'll be fine, we'll see you tomorrow, right? If you're going to be successful at work, you're going to have relationships and friendships at work. And it's just, you're just thinking about the same thing at school, same thing in your neighborhood. Again, it goes back to when in Rome, be like the Romans, you're going to have to develop a sort of support structure that can help you, support you when you're at work. It's interesting, as Asians, we're so private, we're so introverted that oftentimes hurts us as we try to get to that next level, because we don't have that relational background to be able to build off some sort of relationship or some sort of foundation. So it may not be natural, but it's something that I think if you do that. Then the last thing I said is bet on yourself. This goes back to that conservatism versus the aggressiveness. When you play team sports, you learn to have to put yourself on the line. You have to take that shot. You have to be willing to fail in order to succeed, right? And so, we watched our son play basketball in high school, and again, a very typical Asian thing, and I can see some of myself in him. But never always passes, playing basketball, right? Never wants to take the shot. Never wants to take the shot. Always wants to pass, and that's good. I mean, there's a role for that. But part of that is our Asian nature, right? We don't want to fail. We don't want to take. If we take the shot, we risk missing, right? And that fear of failure will oftentimes prevent us from actually taking a step or taking a chance. And so when I say bet on yourself, we talked about this a little bit last time, but after 18 years, I made the decision to leave Exxon and go to a company called Insurance. And never would have thought, I never would have ever imagined leaving Exxon. They treated me great. It was a great career. I still to this day have just fantastic memories of my other people and what Exxon did for me. But the guy who was recruiting me, he said something that to this day I repeat over and over to the people that I work with. But he said, because I said, why would I leave? I've got job security. I've got 18 years of seniority. I've got very secure. All the stock plans and all that stuff. And he basically just said, if that's what you want, then you should stay. But if you want to bet on yourself, and if you want to try something to get even bigger, then this is the opportunity for you. But you've got to be able to decide: do you want to bet on yourself or not? And that was one of those risk-reward type decisions that Janice and I had to make. But at the end, we said we're willing to bet on ourselves, and we're willing to take that chance, and we're willing to make a move, to make a change. And as Asians, as we fight that conservative nature, we're very much gonna consider we're going to be risk averse. We're going to take the surefire way. We're going to take the more certain path. But it's again, as you learn your strengths and weaknesses, as you figure out what you want to do, what I would tell you is if you get to that point where you've got to make a decision of what you want to do, just think about that in the back of your mind. What do you want to bet on? You want to bet on yourself to do something different, or do you want to continue to do something that and not to say there's a right answer or wrong answer, but that's just the process. We said this at the last week's conclusion, and we'll say it again. As you're thinking about that, as you're thinking about being tips for a successful career, as you're thinking about what gives you passion, as you think about what gives you energy versus what drains you of your energy, as you think about what things you want to bet on yourself, it all comes down to why are you working? What are you trying to do? Are you trying to do it for yourself? Are you trying to do it for fame and popularity and power? Or are you trying to do it to bring money? It always comes down to that, because that will help you understand what your motives are and what your intentions are. That's what God's asking us to do. And everything we do, do it for the glory of God, because we're working for God, not for them. So the last slide we have as a wrap up, when we talked about Christ in our career, remember we said, to bring joy, to have joy in your career, you've got to understand your relationship with God. Because, if you're struggling and if you're living in slavery to sin, that's not what God wants. He wants us to be free and in his presence. And then as Janice mentioned earlier today, if you're feeling discriminated against, if you're feeling like you're being misunderstood, and as a result, you're being held back, remember, choose hope versus hate. The ultimate person who role model for us is Jesus Christ, and how he was mistreated and how he was misunderstood. And that is the example that we're to follow, and that, God will deliver us just like he delivered his son, Jesus Christ, from that misunderstanding.
I guess we'll open it up to questions.
Yes, sir.
So a lot of us are grew up in China, same here, college or we didn't have a lot of things in common. I think that's a big problem for us. So I can read the American life and we talk in the church, right? Then it's heavy talk. Everybody is trying to track. You didn't have any reading, and then I left and I forget about all of what he actually taught. I don't know. Tomorrow maybe I forget his name, right? So I have learned this area. I have a cultural difference, right? But I think most of the things is we don't have anything in common. In the past, for example, if I talk with some of my American classmates, right? Maybe we sit together, we were doing some homework or something, and they were talking about some, maybe, I don't know, maybe some TV series they watched as a kids. They were smiling. I sometimes I try to point out what is this, and then what is that. And after several times, I gave up, right? So we don't have anything in common in the past, and we don't even have anything in common right now. I was worried about status, how to do these regulations, how to do a driver license, how these taxes report, how they do that. But most things we don't have common things in the past, we don't have common things right now. So what's your advice on that? I don't think I can just jump in, and I think that would be awkward.
It's a great observation, right? That's exactly the situation. So hopefully you guys heard the question, and those online heard the question, but it's, we're new, right? We don't have things in common. We don't see eye to eye, right? We can't make small talk. How do we get there? And what I would say, I'll start with something, and then Janice or anyone else who has an idea, feel free to chime in. But the first thing I would say is it takes time, right? Don't think you can just snap your finger and all of a sudden have things in common that you can talk about. You can have friends all of a sudden at work and things like that. It's going to take time. It's going to take effort. It doesn't just happen because there is a cultural difference. There is a background difference. You were raised differently than people were raised here in the States. But you're gonna have to make the effort, right? You're gonna have to be. So, the reason this is what we were talking about when we went to college. And we came back and struggled coming back to our Chinese churches. And I'll tie it together with what you're struggling with. But when we were growing up, we were fine in the Chinese church. we were brought up. That's how we learned. We were okay driving an hour to get to church, spending the whole day at church, basically, you know, and then coming home afterwards with our parents. That's the way we had grown up. That's what we knew as what Sundays were. When we went to college, you know, we went to the American churches, right? We went to churches that had a different, you know, the contemporary services, right? We went to things that we had never really been exposed to before. And we started realizing, oh my gosh, you know, this is so much, you know, we can relate so much more to this than we have been in the past. And when we graduated from college, went back to Houston, went back to those churches, all of a sudden we realized, wait a minute, now I've seen what's different out there. And it's hard for us to go back to that same type of church. In fact, we volunteered a lot. We helped the youth pastor quite a bit. And it was very tough because we had a long discussion one time with the youth pastor at Houston Chinese Church. And we just said, you know, we're struggling here, you know, Pastor, we're just not getting fed here. Because, you know, we've seen, we're part of Campus Crusade for Christ, we're part of these other ministries, and we were just not getting anything out of the church anymore. That's a lot of what these high school kids are probably saying to their parents today. But it took time for us to evolve and grow and see that side. But, you know, we told our pastor that, you know, we told her we were pioneering, and a lot of our friends were now, you know, years behind us now coming through. None of them, I can just tell you, none of them have gone back to the Chinese church. They've all gone to Americanized churches, right, across cultural churches, neighborhood churches, contemporary churches, all these kind of things, because they've just evolved in the way they've learned, the way they want to be around people and things. And so things can't stay the same. Things have to evolve as you're evolving here in the States and as your interests are changing. So what I guess I'm trying to say is don't expect it overnight, but you are going to have to make an effort to find things in common. So the fact that you don't have anything in common now doesn't mean you shouldn't in a year from now, right? You're going to have to make the effort to try to learn football, baseball, you know, all the different teams around here to try to understand and try to relate to some of your colleagues. But realize that you're going to evolve through the time, and that you're going to embrace that change or embrace that evolution, because that's how you, 5 years from now, you look back and say, okay, now I understand, you know, what I had to go through in order to get to where I am. But if you just hold on to where you are, so some of the parents, this is kind of that analogy, some of the parents, because we were helping with the youth group at the Houston Chinese Church, some of the parents were like, why won't my kids come back? Why can't they come back? You know, this is the church they grew up in. You know, what's wrong? Why are they different? Why won't they come back anymore? And we had to help them understand. It's because they're in Rome and they're becoming Romans, right? They're starting to understand how to find things in common with other folks here in the United States. And the old church is no longer meeting their needs, and you've got to let them go. You've got to let them evolve. You've got to let them grow. In the same way as you guys are, you know, I know many of you haven't been here in the States for very long, but if you want to, you know, if your intention is to stay here, if your intention is to grow and continue to be successful here in the United States, you're going to have to evolve with the people around you. It's just, I don't know if that helps, but it's just, it's a recognition that it's a tough process. It's going to take time. It's going to take effort, but but you're going to have to start the process.
Something that helps me is, I hear what you're saying, is it's hard to find common ground with some people. And, what I do is I think sometimes if you think that when you meet someone and you think you might want to have a relationship with them, might become friends. It's like Tim was saying, you should initiate that process. Say, hi, I'm so-and-so. And you're saying, I'm talking, I don't understand what he's talking about. I don't know anything about football. And he's talking about the Browns and, all this other stuff. But if it's something that you think, but I like this person, I'd like to get to know him. It's like when I go to a dinner with Tim for work, I don't know anybody. I have to meet 20 people at one time. I get my phone out and I get my notes out and I start typing in names and things like people that I think I should remember next time. And I know I won't because my memory is not very good or that everything went too fast. I take notes, and the relationships that I think that I should try to develop, I take notes to help me have something to talk to them about the next time I see them. So if they have kids, I will remember, okay, this mom, they have a daughter in college, she goes to Brown, they have another daughter, she goes to Berkeley, I write that down. And when you're saying I have nothing to talk to them about, the next time you see them, you'll say, hey, how is your daughter doing in Brown? And it will touch them because they'll say, wow, you actually were listening to me. You remembered. And because you made an effort to get to know them, they might reciprocate. 50-50. A relationship goes both ways, right? They have to want to get to know you, and you need to want to get to know them. And so in a professional setting, it's the same thing. When you're talking to someone, take some notes. If you go, this is a relationship I need to nurture. This is a relationship that I think is important. Take notes on the slide. Otherwise, it's kind of creepy if you're taking notes while you're talking to them. Write it down and then make a point the next time you see them to say hi. So I wrote down some of your names because I'm really bad with Chinese names. And it's because I'm opposite you, right? When I hear an American name, I can remember it. I know pastors' daughters' names because they're all American names. But then I was saying, okay, I have to remember it's Eileen, it's Wei Chu, and that doesn't work well for me, but I know when I write it down, it helps me remember because I want to do that. So then the next time I see them, I can. So I don't know if that will help because I know what you're saying. I can't even remember what we just talked about because it's not meaningful to me. But if that's a relationship you want to build, take notes and continue, like Tim was saying, continue to try because one of these days you'll see some success. And I would also say that I understand that it's all you grew up in China. Find an American-born Chinese to get to know. That's much easier a gap to fill. And once you're comfortable talking to ABC, you start to gain the confidence, you gain the skills. They tell you, you need to go watch this TV show. Everyone's watching it. Okay, if there's one American show you need to watch, this is it. Do it. Do it. That's where you have common ground. It's you have a conversation. And I think part of the reason my parents went to church is they wanted to network as well, because I know they asked each other how to deal with the day-to-day things of living in America. And so asking each other is also, I think, something that surely you're not the only one person who struggles with trying to remember, conversations, trying to understand someone, trying to connect. And so being able to actually, as a church family, help each other also is helpful.
As I just write down the we are more task oriented,
and American culture is more like relationship-based. And also you mentioned a word called support structure in the company. So I'm just wondering, like, how does the relationship help you to achieve different results or goals in the company? Because in our department, we have like half Asian people and half like American. So I'm very related about that. So but like something I noticed is when I talk to like maybe native speakers, they work here, and in the meeting they are more chatting, but they can at the end of the day they didn't get a problem solved, but they feel very good relationship. So yeah, so that's just want to hear your thoughts about that.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting point, because you remember last week, getting those results is important, right? So don't get me wrong. You got to get the results first. You got to have the answers first, right? But having the answers and getting the results will only get you so far. That's why Asians are so successful to a certain point, and then they become less successful higher, because getting the right answer will get you far for a while. And then at some point, you've got to not only get the right answer, but you also have to have those relationships, and you got to have that ability to be able to motivate people, to be able to talk to people and correct them without pissing them off, right? And getting them mad, right? So yeah, at the entry level in particular, or even the first, even half of your career, getting the answer right is most of the issue. But that'll get you to middle management. And then the reason we hit the wall is because we don't have those other skills to take us, further beyond that. So that's what I would tell you is right now, you're probably seeing, accounting is a good example, but a lab is another good example where the results are really important, at this level. But as you climb up further, it's going to be just as important to be able to not just you get the right answer, but how do you get your team to get to the right answer? How do you influence someone? How do you get someone who's maybe not as motivated, who's not as studious, who's not as capable, to still, get them to perform at a higher level than what they are themselves want to perform at? That's when you start getting to those higher levels of management, or higher levels of the company, when you start working beyond your own ability and start affecting and impacting your teams or your other people's ability to perform better.
Actually, if I heard it correctly, I mean, we are the second generation as a believer, right? So I want to know, like, how did your parents receive Jesus Christ, or like where, for example, if they got in here, then they got help from, people from was like the same time, or maybe other white people, like how did they receive faith?
My parents accepted Christ when they came to the United States. So my mom was the first person to accept Christ, and she has a testimony in it herself. But in a nutshell, I was very sick. My mom was pregnant with me when my dad left for graduate school in the United States. And so I came to the U.S. when I was 2 years old. And I came sooner than they planned. My dad was still in graduate school because the doctor said I would die. I was very, very sick. And so my grandmother told my mom about a Western God. His name was Jesus Christ. If all the other doctors, we went to Japan and everywhere, that perhaps he's the one true God who can heal my body and restore my health. And so my mom said she prayed to Jesus Christ. She said, I don't know who you are, but if you're the true God, heal my daughter and I will believe in you. And so they left for the United States because my dad wanted to see me before I died. It sounds so dramatic. And my mom said the moment my feet stepped on American ground, I got better. Didn't go to a doctor, didn't do anything. I was 100% within 6 months. And so she decided she was going to go to church. And they were Chinese, like her. They, the nice thing about some of the Chinese community churches, they reach out when they hear there's a new person in town. So they reached out to her and told her to come to Bible study on Friday nights, family Bible study. And my dad did not believe in Christ. He actually was very angry. He would not take her to Bible study. So she had to catch a ride to Bible study, took me to Bible study, took my brother to Bible study. And for several years, she prayed for my father. My father, and so that is her faith story. So she accepted Christ right before she came to the United States. And she was the first person in our family to become a Christian. My father was so mad because he's a self-made man. He's the first person in his family to go to college. He went to that Taiwan Dashi, the same thing as Beijing, and it was the smartest, everybody full scholarship. He was self-made man. His intellect, his intelligence, he doesn't need God. He decided to disprove the Bible because he's, scientist. And so he studied the Bible for a year. And at the end of that, he decided that it was the truth. He couldn't deny it, and he either had to accept the truth, or say, I don't care, it's the truth, but I still reject it. And so he accepted the truth, and he accepted Christ as the Savior. And so then the two of them raised my brother and myself in a Christian home. And they continue to serve in the church. And that's why we say that our parents, I grew up serving God, especially for the students at UTMB Galveston at the Medical Center. And they, I've made so many Thanksgiving meals, and my parents felt like they needed to give back to God who saved them. And they were able to reach out to a lot of medical students and graduate students and fellows from China because of their position. And my parents served in Houston Chinese Church, and they started a church down in Galveston because there were so many students in Galveston. There's a Galveston Chinese Church. And so that's the legacy of their faith that they gave to us. And I accepted Christ in Vacation Bible School when I was 8 years old. And it was an American Vacation Bible School. And so God, in his mercy, when I was very young, came into my heart. So my parents are literally first generation Christian from their family, and nobody else in my father's family accepted Christ. He has 7 brothers and 2 sisters. Probably about 10 years ago, brother number 4 did accept Christ. And I think his mother might have, but she couldn't say anything. She's out in Taiwan. They do a lot of ancestral worship in Taiwan, right? It's a lot of idol worship. So that is, they are definitely not conforming to what their family expectations are. Yeah.
My situation was a little bit different. My parents grew up in the Philippines. And they came from very large families, and all of their brothers and sisters grew up in the church. I think in the Philippines, there's a strong Catholic presence, and they grew up in that kind of church church environment. My mom and my dad both were very involved with the church as kids. And my mom plays organ, piano, my dad sang, directed choir. And so they had that whole, kind of background to begin with. My dad has 5 sisters, and they would all pray for us, and they would be.
They were spinsters. They never got married.
They were never married. There's only one left, so living right now. But they would pray for us every day. They told us, and it was a very special relationship that they had. And in fact, to this day we look at our kids and we kind of say, we are where we are because of their prayers for us, since we were just kids.
And our relationship with the American church, as always, the Chinese church is supported by the American church. And then on occasion, we would join certain things that the American church put out, like vacation rights, things like that.
So there was another question about how do you prepare for an interview? I think it was one of the questions that came in this week. And so what I would just say is, when you're preparing for an interview, I mean, Janice's story was right when she said we bought a suit and we tried to dress up. What I would just tell you is, go overboard in terms of your resume, go overboard in terms of dressing up. Someone might say you don't have to wear a tie, you don't have to wear a suit, wear a tie or a suit, right? Your first impression is important. Spend time on your resume, get a lot of extra eyes to look at your resume, so it's not just, sometimes you can be blinded by a typo or something, yourself, get someone else to look at it. But what I found to be the best is, you've got what's on paper, you've got what's on, what you've done, what you can talk about in terms of your resume. But you should think of like 3 key messages that you want to make sure you communicate during that interview. Okay, so you don't have to write it all down, you don't have to have a speech, you don't have to do all that stuff, but just think of 3 things that you want to convey about yourself or something that you want them to know as you're going through your interview. And then, during the course of the interview, work those in. So the reason I say that is you don't sit down at the interview and say, okay, I got 3 things I need to tell you. Because there's a lot, some people will do that and it just doesn't work. But it's so much more impactful when you find, and it's what I like to call pivoting. You're talking about something and then you somehow pivot to one of those 3 key points. And the more you can do that and learn how to pivot to something, that the person's talking about, to something that you want them to hear, then that they will hear that more than they would have if you just told them, that old saying, tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them at the end, right? You've heard that kind of saying before. That's fine if you're teaching a class. It's not good if you're trying to have a dialogue with someone, right? That's not going to work. But if you've got those 3 points you want to make during your interview, and you find the appropriate times to make those points during the interview by pivoting to them, you'll come across much more effective, and people will remember what those points are much better than if you just handed it to them.
I will say that our children always ask us to help them with interviews. And I can't, part of what Tim was saying, finding somebody to help you prep for an interview is important. you know, that preparation does make a difference. You know, even if you're going, look, let's help me prep for this interview, help me anticipate some questions, ask me some questions that I think, you know, might come up in the course of the conversation. Here's my answer. And see what, you know, have whoever's helping you give you feedback. Well, that wasn't communicated very well. You know, you said way too many things. What are you trying to say? Or, you know, we don't ask for, at least I don't ask for help very much. But I do notice and I do appreciate that you're never too old to ask for help from someone else. You're never too old to prep and prep hard. Our son was trying to get a job with, he was interviewing with McKinsey, the consulting company, and he prepped for weeks. I think he read everything about the company. He read what was current. He knew who he was interviewing with. He probably knew the full resume. He had small talk written down. He probably practiced it in front of the mirror, for all I know. But, you know, back to the how do you do small talk? Well, you know, you practice it. You know what the school, his kids went to what school, and whatever. You know, I'm sure he had an arsenal of whatever comes at me, I'm prepared to have a conversation with him about that. And I'm prepared to pivot. Hillary Clinton is very good at pivoting. You know, you talk, and then you are able to pull out the points you want. So just looking at our kids who are more your age, they value prepping and they value asking questions of their friends and having them look at things and say, what do you think? Before finally.
The reason, you know, so that small talk is important for interviews too. So that's James was saying. You know, the reason we put up on our slides that we're Texas Longhorns, and the reason we do that, you know, whenever I introduce myself, like I told you this week, I was going around meeting people in Utah. And the first thing I would tell people is, I'm a Texas Longhorn. And everyone's like, here we go again. You know, he's going to talk about being a Longhorn again. But the reason we do that, the reason I do that, is it gives something of a common point that someone can then start talking about, like even if either they're a Oklahoma Sooner or they're an Aggie, and they immediately start, you know, putting the horns down and things, and it just immediately breaks tension. Or when I was in Utah, and these guys aren't from the University of Texas, the one thing they immediately said was, "Oh, so you're going to the SEC now? You're abandoning the Big 12." And so it was just immediately, it just provides an opportunity to have small talk, and it's not like, you know, I mean, we love being Texas Longhorns, but we don't love it that much. It's just provides that opportunity for small talk. And so you've got to put yourself out there. You've got to give people the chance to see something or know something about you. You've got to be vulnerable first. You've got to give them something, which will then allow them to start finding things that come and start doing something. Yeah. And find ways to talk. There was a question, how to build professional relationships. And, you know, it was kind of related to the question you were asking earlier. There's no easy way. And I you know, Janice and I will tell you, we're not the experts by any means. I mean, I still look at the executive suite that I work with, and I just look sometimes and just feel so inadequate. You know, despite, you know, my background that I've told you about, I still feel inadequate when these guys are able to hold a conversation and talk about nothing for, you know, 45 minutes. But it's fun. It's a fun conversation, but it's about nothing, right? I don't have that, you know, that ease to do that. So it's not. So again, we don't want to sound like the experts, but what we would just say is, just take us one step at a time. You don't have to be that expert. You don't have to be that good. But ask someone to go to lunch with you. You know, go take a break with someone. Or, you know, when you're in the kitchen warming up, you know, your coffee or something, just start engaging someone in a conversation and just start trying those kind of things. And it's just one step at a time. That's how you build a relationship. Is not, you don't purposely say, look, I want to build a relationship with you. You just start talking, and you just start finding things in common, and then you just start connecting. Right? That's really the art of doing that. Yeah.
I'm curious, like, in terms of your, I guess, experience in management and how you pick up those management skills, and how you, like, have people be happy and happy with their job, but also work hard. Because each person is different, they all have like different personalities, and so like I'm curious, like, did you take courses that help you with manage people, or did you pick it up as you go? Like, where do you get that access to the skill?
It's so how do you learn these management skills? How do you develop them? They definitely have schools and courses. Exxon sent me on many of these courses. Believe it or not, there's something called CEO school as well. So it's not something that you
for new CEOs. When I asked them, what are you doing? He goes, I'm going to New York. Was it New York?
Yeah, there's one school in New York, at Harvard Business School. And so there's all academics. There's tons of books, right, that tell you about ways to manage people, ways to do better. But I'll tell you, the best way to learn is to actually do and just learn. And one of the things that I've continued to be an advocate for is team sports, because I think you learn more about how to deal with people and how to inspire and encourage. How do you get mad at them for not doing their job, but not, totally disillusion them so that they don't want to be on the team anymore, right? Those are skills you learn playing sports together. It's those types of situations that you've got to put yourself into that will then allow you to figure out what works for you and what doesn't work for you. I hired one lady who works for me, who I keep telling her she has the gift of, challenging someone and calling them out without them feeling like they're being called out, right? And so she'll be so just direct and blunt and say, what are you doing? That's, it's stupid, or something, something like that, without making you feel stupid. And that's a gift. It takes a lot of practice. It takes a lot of authenticity. It takes a lot of building trust. But it's just putting yourself in that situation and learning is probably the best way. I know a lot of guys who've read all the books and are terrible at management, right? And it's not a head knowledge thing. It's just how you react with people. And probably the biggest thing that I would tell you that I found helps in management and in trying to get the most out of your team is, first of all, you've got to build trust and credibility with them first, right? So you've got to open up, you've got to help them believe in you. And that means you're going to have to open up and be vulnerable for them. So you got to lead by example. That's the first thing you have to do. And that takes time. And if you don't do that, they won't do that. So you're going to have to take that first step. But one of the things, once you have that trust and credibility and they know that you're trying to help, right? If they know you're trying to help them and not try to undermine them or go around their back and stab them in the back, you've got to get through that trust and credibility first. But once they realize, or hopefully realize, that you're trying to help them, then the best way to approach someone is to say, look, I know you can do so much better than what you did, and so, how can I help you do that? What is it that we need? What do you need to be able to achieve what I know you can achieve? Because no one, especially Asians, want to fail, right? Everyone wants a good grade. Everyone wants to do a good job. Everyone wants to do a good thing. Oftentimes they just don't know what that good thing is. And if they don't understand what their goal is, or if they don't understand what they're trying to do, then they can't do it. But if you make it clear what the objective is and how they're going to be graded by it, or what the metrics are that will determine whether it's successful, I find that most people want to do the right thing and want to be successful and want to win. And it's just not knowing what it is that they need to do. So that's one of the that's one of the things I think about.
I will say that as I have observed him through his career and the different supervisors he's had to get through, I know that one of his first supervisor role was to fire someone. The girl cried, and he came home. He was like, "Oh my gosh, I had to fire someone," and she just cried. I didn't know what to do. She was so sad. I think he learned something through that. I'm sure he did a lot of self-analysis and saying, could I have said that in a different way that, she might have cried anyway. But this is the hard knocks of learning how to manage at a basic level. The other thing is he'd always come home and he would say, so-and-so is a really good communicator, and he would just kind of file that back behind him. Tim's very observant in his environment. I guess as Asians, we do that a lot. We observe, and you're smart enough to go, okay, that worked. File it, But I know that every time he says that there's a good supervisor, I would always encourage him to say, well, what was it about him that you liked? And you should remember that, next time if you get to that position, what worked, what didn't work. So you can learn from the experiences you have. It doesn't even have to be a good supervisor. It just has to, when you see someone as a good communicator or someone that's done something a certain way, because he'll always tell me what the good and the bad of the day is. That's something that you can just file and say, okay, that worked, and think about that, so on and so forth. And you learn from your mistakes as much as you do from like this poor girl was crying, as well as you do from the positive and the negative. But I will say he has praised as many as he said are not very good. And those are the things that you don't want to do. Those are the things that you do want to do. I think that when he has been in a position where he walks in, you're the most important person in the room. And likely a lot of you will be in that position somewhere in your career. You have to ask yourself, what am I going to do? Are you going to give the credit to your team that got you to this place? Are you going to be the person who takes all the credit yourself? And the best leaders give the credit to their team. They're not the ones that hog all of the glory. And I think that never, no matter what level you are, is never a bad idea. Because I've observed Exxon executives and Coke executives and Calumet executives. I'm working on the health frontier because I haven't hunted on them very much. And you can tell that there's a distinct difference. One thing that was very, very different is that, and Tim pointed that out from day one, is that Coke executives in general, because of the structure of the company and the way that you're promoted, tend to be much more unapproachable, egotistical, not likable people. Coke executives, because of the way they manage and because of the way the company is led by Charles Coke, their managers are very nice people. They are not, they're completely opposite the Exxon managers. Both companies are successful, clearly. So at the end of the day, it's take what you think you like, remember it, and when you're in that position, try it out and see how it fits.
Any other questions?
Yeah, so I'd like to ask when you have some specific request for your supervisor, like green card, salary, or promotion. So how should you start the conversation with your supervisor or the upper level?
So the question is, how do you, if you have a certain request, like a promotion or a raise or, something that you really believe you are due, how do you bring that up to your supervisor? What I would say is, be direct. Maybe don't beat around the bush. It's so funny sometimes as a supervisor, as a manager, someone will come up and tell me some things that I'm trying to figure out. What is that person trying to tell me? What is that person asking for? I don't understand. And sometimes and as Asians, we will be less direct, right? We will beat around the bush. We'll be more, we'll assume you understand what I'm trying to say, kind of thing. And in America, people are more direct, and they're just more clear of what's going on. And so I mean, during your annual appraisal process, or I would very encourage you guys to have an ongoing, regular discussion with your supervisor. Most supervisors that I find in the companies that I deal with, they don't do what I like to call one-on-ones, which are either weekly or every other week, spending half an hour or an hour with their employees, because they're saying, well, I see them every day. We don't need to have a special one-on-one time. It's like, no, you see them every day, and that's you're covering day-to-day stuff. You're firefighting. You're working through short-term issues. But these one-on-ones are meant to cover longer-term issues and things like performance issues and career opportunities and developmental opportunities. So if your supervisor if you don't have time set aside to talk to your supervisor every so often, I would say some weekly is okay, depending on the role you have. Every other week is probably more typical. I would try to encourage you to have that ongoing discussion with your supervisor, because if you never talk to them, then it's very difficult to try to approach him at some point and ask him for a raise or something, right? But if you're talking to him every couple of weeks and you're talking about longer term initiatives, longer term things on career development, then it's then you're used to having those conversations, and they know what you're doing. That the supervisor wants you to be not just managing your day-to-day work, but to have a plan or a vision or a strategy of what you're trying to do long term, and to see you actually, driving this team in that direction as well. And the more you can have those kind of conversations and help him or her see what you see and know what you're doing to help drive that type of behavior, the more they'll appreciate the role you have on the team. And then, the conversation is basically, well, we've been talking about this goal for 6 months now, and how important it was for the team, and we've been working towards it, and we've now achieved that level. I feel like we've been working well together as a team, and I feel like, appropriate for me to get a raise or get a promotion from this at this point. It's easier to have that conversation if it's part of an ongoing conversation than it is if you just walk in your call. So that's maybe. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Yes.
I truly appreciate the long content. I could personally benefit a lot from what you guys shared with me. So I just apologize that my question to the I'm just particularly interested in your roles as the
need to leave. So my question is, do you have any suggestion for young parents like us who have middle kids? We as first generation, we're raising the second generation. And I think we probably both have experienced almost all the aspects from all kinds of lives with first generation, being the second generation, and seeing the third generation grow up and have a lot of experience. I know it's not like that's the answer to what this question, but anything you want to share?
So for those online, the question was, as parents of a third generation, what kind of tips or suggestions or observations do you have for other parents who are maybe even parents of second generations and things like that? What kind of things what I would tell you is when we were raising Jonathan and Caroline, they again, I'll say this with some regret, but they don't speak any Chinese. They are fully Americanized. We've brought them, into a Chinese family, in a Chinese home. They've been to Chinese churches, but it's kind of the thought of, if they're going to be successful here, we wanted them to be fully immersed in the American school system, American, kind of culture. And so if your kids, I guess, and I'm not trying to say you should let go of your Chinese heritage at all. I'm not trying to say any of that at all. But if your kids need to blend in with the other kids, right? They've got to dress like them. They've got to play the same games that they play. They've got to grow up with them, because they're going to be relating with these kids, with their peers for the rest of their lives, right? And so the sooner that they can assimilate and learn and be part of that group, the more they're going to be able to break through these ceilings and other things we talked about earlier. So I would just say, don't. There are certain traditions that you need to hold on to. And we would have traditions that we would do, like we would go home to every Christmas to each of our families, and as a family, the whole group would get together. They just spend Christmas together, right? That was kind of our Asian heritage and our desire to do that. So you got to hold on to those traditions, but you've got to let go of some other ones to let them, assimilate. Let your kids assimilate and be part of this American, experience. I think that's what I'm saying.
Those are wise words. But I don't know. You could look at it several ways. I think that. I guess when our parents raised us, the first thing that they taught us was to fear God. I think that they weren't hands-on because they were trying to build wealth. We were so poor. I remember we almost starved at one point. We ran out of money, but the church gave us some food. That's why Tim says he was a latchkey kid. He was just, they expected him to do. They instilled in him good values. They expected him to follow those values, and he didn't disappoint them. But at the end of the day, I think my parents, and I think Tim's family and his parents as well, they always came back down to the God loves you. We are blessed because whatever our circumstance, Christ is in our hearts, and we'll be fine. Doesn't matter how much money we have, doesn't matter what's going to go on. God is in control of our lives, and that is not anything that we can control ourselves, and we can have peace. So I grew up very poor, but I didn't have any worries that I not going to have food on my table because of my parents' faith. And that's, I think, if you could pass down your faith every day, your kids will be fine. You know, because they know that no matter what happens, even if the parents don't have an answer, that they can pray to God, and God will be faithful to them. So I think it's the faith is the first thing for us. What was passed to our parents was what was important for us to pass to our children. And we did that by just praying for them every day. And I'm pretty sure my mom, she said, I didn't know anything about what homecoming was. I didn't know anything about the homecoming dances or prom or whatever. She goes, but I prayed for you every day. I didn't know what to pray for you about, but I prayed for you every day. And I trusted God to take care of you guys. So, you know, pass along your faith. I think that's the biggest thing that we wanted to do. And then I think our parents somehow instilled in us a lot of self-confidence, you know, because that allows you to put up with all the discrimination, all the harassment we had. I have zero issues with my self-image. I don't know how that happened, but I give all the credit to my parents. We didn't have the best clothes. In fact, I think all I wore were t-shirts and jeans for most of my life because that was the cheapest thing. But I didn't have any issues with self-confidence. And I think it's because they told me all the time, there's nothing you cannot do with God's help. And work hard, you know, fear God, work hard, and love your family. If you want something, you got to work for it. Nobody's going to give it to you. Even with our kids, as privileged as they are, we always told them, you have to work hard. You may have money to go to college that we saved for, but you better get those scholarships if you're capable of getting the scholarships. You know, it's a work ethic. And they told us that what we read is generationally, you know, first generation is huge work ethic because they're immigrants. They have to work so hard. They have to sacrifice everything, especially for their kids, to build generational money so they can give it to the second generation. The second generation remembers it because they see all that hard work, the slaving, long hours, and so they have a good work ethic. It's the third generation and the fourth generation that somehow that work ethic sometimes gets lost because they have the security, they have the generational money, they're established. And it's rare that you see dynasties go past 3 generations because that fourth generation they're into drugs, they do whatever, right? But it's that same kind of fear God, love your family, and work hard. I think if you can pass that from one generation to another, then your generations will be fine.
You know, my parents, I told you, both worked, and so we were kind of on our own. My brother and my sister and I were kind of on our own. And we learned, you know, somehow we survived and we did fine, right? But the way we were parents were different from the way my parents were from me. We were very much involved with our kids in just about everything they did. And we call it helicopter parenting too, which is not always the best thing. But we were much more engaged. And when Janice says that she quit being a physical therapist and became a homemaker, that was because of her view that her job was to raise the kids, not to be a physical therapist. And again, everyone makes their own decisions. That's not to say that that's everyone's decision. But in our case, that was the decision that we chose to make. And I think you just have to be deliberate about it. You know, whether you're working or not, both parents, whether you're working or not, it doesn't matter. You got to be deliberate about being their parents and creating that environment, that experience that you want them to have. You can't, you know, it's easy just to kind of let it happen. It's much harder to be deliberate about it. And as parents, I think we're being called to be more deliberate about we talked about this at the family fellowship, but it's God has been deliberate in his relationship with us. He wants us to be his children, and he has, created an opportunity for us to be in his image, to have that relationship with Christ. And he's given us our children as a way for us to see what it's like for us to be children of God. And as parents of our children, we now get to see and experience what God must feel like, or at least a glimpse of what God must feel like when he's trying to parent us, and that should draw us closer to him. The more deliberate you are as a parent, the more understanding you'll have of the relationship God is trying to have with us as individuals. So the other thing I would say is just be as deliberate as you can about how you want to raise your kids, because it's purposeful. It's going to allow you to, again, understand what God is trying to do with you.
About sports. You mentioned that team sports is the individual sports. For me, I like badminton and soccer. I try to play badminton more because it's individual. I try to play soccer too, but I don't want to play it a lot anymore because it's team. I used to join a team of Chinese students and play the team. The team was so Chinese, everybody is Chinese. And the culture is Chinese. Why do I say that? So me, I have a lot of shortcomings, right? I have a lot of bad things, I think a lot of bad things. But for them, for that captain, it gives me a feeling that the more I perform, the more he hates me. That's why I say Chinese. Same thing when I go to work. Sometimes I feel the more attention I draw, the more somebody above hates me. So, I extended it to work, but I think you guys may not experience that a lot because you grew up in this part. So what's your comment?
I would say it's one of the things that I've seen as a manager, and even sometimes as playing team sports, is we can be very self-conscious about our failures and about our performance. And so as Asians, it's very easy for us to say, again, people are, just like what you said, people see maybe that and how I'm playing, and they're unhappy. It's easy to be sensitive to that. What I found as a manager is I don't see that as much as people think that I do. And people are being more sensitive. You do something wrong, you maybe make a mistake. It's acknowledged, but it's not the end of the world. But sometimes we think it's bigger than it really is. Now, I don't know if that's the situation or not, but that's one of the observations I make is we oftentimes think like I was answering some questions on an earnings call this week, and I keep thinking about this one question that I don't think I answered very well, and I keep thinking, I should have, if I could get that back, if I could only get that back, I could answer that question right. And I keep thinking, my other colleagues, probably are thinking, hey, you didn't answer that question very well. In the reality, I don't think they remember it at this point at all, right? I just don't think it's something that I still dwell on and I still think about, but I don't think they do. Now, if it becomes habitual, or if it becomes, something that happens all the time, maybe that's a different story. But sometimes you just have to be willing to put your neck out there and be wrong, and let people say what they want to think or say what they want to say, and just have the self-confidence to know, as Janice was saying, that look, I'm doing my best. I know what I'm giving it my all, and I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing. So at some point, you can't worry about what other people are thinking, and you just got to do what you know is right. That's the situation that you're talking about now, but that's a situation that comes up. Yes, yeah, it is. It's time to go. So let's pray. Thank you guys for sticking with us this long, and it is time to wind down. Let's pray. Father, thank you so much for giving us a couple weeks to get to know each other, giving us the opportunity to share Janice and our experience. We know that we don't have all the answers, and that's pretty apparent from this Q&A. But you've taught us so much, Father, and we thank you for the opportunity to be able to at least share some of our experiences with this group. It's so encouraging to see this group cares so much about their work, who cares about their lives and their families here, Father, and are looking for your guidance and your vision for their lives. Father, we pray that you will make clear to each one of them what your will is for their lives. Help them to open their hearts and to follow your path, even though it may not be the path that we often want for ourselves. Help us to be open to that. Father, most important, help us to rely more and more on you for your salvation through our lives, to work it out so that we can enjoy the freedom that you've given us in Christ. And so we pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you very much.
So there's more cheese grits, I think, that Janice brought. I think there's some additions.
Don't do it.